everybody, welcome to Chapter 8 Product Evaluation Strategies. And, whoops, sorry about that. Alright, so there's your objectives, blah, 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 blah. And now we can talk about the stuff. So basically, users will say, we need new blah, or we need a new phone system, we need new blah. And they expect the IT department to evaluate different ones and then, buy the right one for them. Or in some cases where office politics are a huge thing, they're looking for somebody to blame when everything goes wrong. So, anyway, so way back in the 80s, and this is really where IT people kind of made a lot of money. Because IT used to be so much harder than it is today. Today, anybody can watch a video on YouTube and put a PC together. Back in the 80s, that was not the case. Each piece of equipment had little dip switches and jumpers that had to be moved, and you had to go through the product documentation. When you installed a hard drive, you had to record the number of cylinders and tracks per sector and a bunch of other stuff and punch that all in. Otherwise, it wouldn't work properly. So, a lot more stuff. And the problem back then was everything wasn't standardized. So if you bought a Dell server, you had to only buy Dell add-on cards. So if you were going to make it a networkable server, you had to buy a Dell NIC card. If it was going to have sound, you had to buy a Dell sound card. Everything that you bought had to be Dell because Dell had a different socket for their cards than everybody else did. So once you picked that first server, you were stuck with that vendor. If you went with IBM, you bought all IBM servers and you bought all IBM cards and you bought all IBM blah, everything. So it was a pain in the butt. And a big problem was not only did you have to know the basics of how networking worked, but you had to understand how IBM did their stuff. Then if you guys ever switched to Dell, then you had to learn how Dell did their stuff because everybody did it differently. Everybody had different speeds and different settings, and it was crazy. So luckily, later on, as things progressed, people realized, hey, this isn't working out. People were not adopting IT as fast as people thought. It was harder to train people because everybody coming in, like how many people actually had time with an IBM PC or an IBM server, that kind of stuff. So they got together and they said, hey, we need to standardize things. So we need to standardize, a common slot. So then it was ISA. And that was industry standard architecture. And that was like the black slot that were 16-bit. And then they did expanded IC or ISA, which had the 32-bit, and they were black slots. And then you had PCI, and then PCIe, and then before that you had AGP for video card and stuff like that. But those were standards so that anybody could make a video card to fit that standard. Once that happened, that's when PCs and technology really began to boom in industry. Because you didn't have anything like Microsoft Office. Almost everybody has Microsoft Office out there. And they can do that because everything's standardized. But back in the day, if you bought Dell, you couldn't use Office. You had to use Dell's stuff, or you had to use somebody else's stuff. So it was just crazy. So nobody could standardize. If you sent an email from your company to another company, if they had a different email server, they couldn't read your email. It was just terrible. All right, so anyway, they standardized. And then everything kind of blew up, and that's how we have today's world. So now you can buy any PC, whether it's a Dell, HP, Gateway, IBM, Lenovo, and they all pretty much take the same thing. If you go buy a hard drive, it'll fit any of those. So again, IT wears many hats, and one of those hats is product evaluation, and that's where you have to evaluate new products or new procedures to do things. One example, one company I was at, a company come in, I think it was Copyco, and they wanted to replace all of our printers. I think we had about 40 printers. So they said, hey, we can get your printing cost down to 9 cents a page. So we would scrap all your printers, and then we would install new ones, and then you would pay rent, and we would supply the ink, and all you had to pay was paper, and then your cost would be 9 cents a page. Because then any maintenance you need, that was included with the rent. So then, the boss is like, well, that sounds good, 9 cents a page. Hey, J Mac, why don't you go evaluate that? And then that means that I need to then go and look at, what are we currently paying per page? So I have to compare apples to apples. So I got to look at the printing cost, without paper, because that's what they were quoting. How much we put into repairs on the 40 printers, in a year period. How much we were paying for toner, how many toner cartridges had been replaced, how many pages had been printed on all the printers, and figure that out. Then once I was done, I was able to go back and say, hey, no, we're currently printing at 6 cents a page, so 9 cents a page would not make sense. Plus, many of our printers were the HP 4000 series, the original ones, and these things were like frickin' crazy good. I mean, they were the rock that really built HP printing. They've never done anything as good as that after that. And that company, I know still today, they're still using some of those printers because they were so good. But I digress. So some things to look at when you're evaluating. Does it perform as advertised? How many times have you bought a product and it does not perform as advertised? And then you have to ask yourself questions. Is this better than what we currently have? Is it compatible with the stuff we have? Is it going to meet the user's needs? What's the user problem? And really, anytime you buy a new product, whether it's hardware or software, it should be in relation to solving a problem. The user says, hey, we're dropping phone calls, we need a new ACD system. So the new ACD system needs to be, on the telephone, needs to be able to not drop calls or handle calls more efficiently so people don't get frustrated and then drop calls. When we buy new PCs, it's got to increase productivity. It's got to solve a problem. So that's really the big thing. You have to ask yourself, what problem does this device or this software solve? And then, like, if you're upgrading, why do I need to upgrade my my email server? Why do I need to upgrade, from Server 2008 to Server 2012? What's the benefit? How much productivity extra do I get out of this? Are there any new features between, Exchange 2008 and Exchange 2012? What's the feature change? Which ones are going to actually benefit me? You don't want new stuff just to have new stuff. New stuff should either solve a problem or increase productivity, and that's it. Alright, so where do you go when you're looking for stuff? Vendor literature, you got to kind of be careful with that stuff. They put all kinds of claims in there. When you look at a McDonald's Big Mac in their literature, it looks freaking amazing. But then when you order one, it comes out and it's like somebody slapped this together with a freaking... I'll digress. But anyway, it doesn't look that good. So you want to go to websites, look for evaluations from other users, go to different user forums. Pretty much every company and every piece of software, there's a forum out there for that device. And usually you want to typically stay away from the official forums, because when you go to the official forums, let's say for IBM, and you start posting how bad their software and stuff is, do you think they keep those posts there, or do you think they get rid of them? Well, they get rid of them, because they want customers who are looking at their stuff to only see the nice stuff. So there's also evaluation versions. Anytime you're looking at software, you should always try to get an evaluation copy of it, where typically you can use it for 30 days or 100 or 3 months or something like that, and see how it performs in your environment. How does it perform on your PCs? So make sure you're using a user PC and not the cool IT PCs. And then ask around, hey, you got any other friends that are using this software? What do they like it? Do they hate it? What's good, what's bad? Alright, all kinds of publications out there. If it's PCs, Tom's Hardware is really cool. Tom's Hardware is a nice site, and they look at things very scientifically. So, like, they have 4 computers that are exactly the same, and they'll put 4 different video cards in there, and they'll say, hey, this computer with everything else is the same, running that video card as your video card, this is the difference. You do have to be careful with that kind of stuff, only because, especially like video cards, if I say, hey, this video card does 105 frames per second, or this video card does 120 frames per second for $100 more, which one's better? Well, when we look at the benchmarks, 120 frames per second is better, so it's worth $100. Well, can the human eye actually perceive 120 frames per second, or is 105 really going to be just fine and save us the $100? You also have to think about where it's going to go. If it's going to go to the marketing department, or maybe you have a department that creates videos for your company for promotional purposes, then they may need that. So look at the source where it needs to go. All right, getting with software, you can typically get an evaluation software of any commercial product that's out there. If you want IT help or help desk software, there's a bunch out there, and you can download their free stuff on the internet. Just be careful. I always had like a bogus Gmail email address that I would use to sign up for that stuff. Otherwise, because if you use your corporate stuff, then you start getting spam. Then they're calling you and they're emailing you, "Hey, did you like our software? We'd like to set up a meeting with you," and blah blah blah. You don't want that. All right, and then decision-making tools. What's the standard out there? When I'm going to buy a product to do, spreadsheets and documents, word processing, the industry standard is Microsoft Office. But Microsoft Office is pretty expensive. If you're in a manufacturing place where you want to put something on the PC so they have access to it, but your company doesn't really use a whole lot of that stuff in the normal part, I'm not talking the business office upstairs, I'm talking like the manufacturing floor where they have a bunch of PCs. You can always put OpenOffice, which is free and is totally compatible. Like I can make a document in OpenOffice and send it to somebody who has Word, and if somebody in Word sends me a document, I can open it in OpenOffice. So that's a good substitute. And then what products are my competitors using? And then they talk about benchmarks. We're going to talk about more of that in a second. And then weighted point evaluation. Now, weighted point evaluation is what we do at Stark State when we do our grading. Like exams are worth 40% of your grade, so they have a weight of 40. And then quizzes maybe have a weight of 30, and then we have another 30 for labs. All right, RFPs are requests for proposals, and we typically just refer to them as RFPs. So when our company, the foundation, wanted to buy a new phone system, we knew we were going to drop $250,000. So we had another company come in, look at our needs, and then they created an RFP. And it was a 3-ring binder that was over an inch thick of all the stuff that the new phone system had to provide. And then, we send the RFP out to all the different phone manufacturers and say, hey, we're looking for something. Here's what we're looking for. Can you fit this need? And then they have to fit your need and tell you, like after they go through the RFP, what they can and cannot meet. And then they come back to you with a price. But it doesn't have to be that formal. You could just be requesting a server and do an RFP. Hey, we need a server that does this. So it could be like 1 page long. All right, so industry standard. Again, we kind of talked about that. Microsoft Office is the standard for word processing. And if you have a standard product, the chances that more people know how to use it increases, so you have less training, you have less problems. And then on the flip side, it might not meet specialized needs. Now, as far as Office stuff goes, that's kind of covered. But when you get into financial software, while one financial package may be great for a small company, it might not meet the needs of a much larger company, a multinational company. All right, and then here's their software accounting illustration. Most small businesses, and any business with 50 employees or less, is probably using QuickBooks to do their stuff, and that's what they bill with. That's what they record purchases with, all that stuff. And then medium to large scale businesses are likely to evaluate multiple specialized needs depending on it. Like there are software packages for accounting for hospital systems. There are accounting packages for insurance agencies, things like that. And then large-scale businesses look for something that can be customized to meet their unique needs. Think General Motors. There's probably no package off the shelf that can actually meet General Motors' needs because they're so big. So get user input before selecting the software. If it's software or hardware for users, you want to get the user's input. You want to maybe get the evaluation copy and put it on a couple users' PCs and have them use it for a little bit and tell you what they liked and what they didn't like. And then kind of put together like a sheet. Here's the pros and the cons of all the different software, and here's what user reported. And that way later on down the road, if they can't really come back after, let's say you decide on software package A, and you had 5 users in that department look at it and nobody reported any issues. Well, then after you buy that software and you install it and they all start whining, you'll be like, well, 5 of you guys tried this out and nobody had a problem with it. What's the deal? As IT people, we can only make decisions based on the information we have available. If we don't have that information available, then we can't make a decision based on it. if nobody used the software, I can't make a decision based on how this is going to work because nobody used it. If people kind of tried it out and just putted around with it a little bit and said, oh, it's great, then my decision is going to be based on that feedback. And you got to make that clear to users, when you're doing the evaluation period. Hey, if you guys are going to do this, you need to do it right. You need to make sure that you're going through all the different steps that you normally do in a day, because we need to find out if it's going to meet our needs. All right, and then if you have information on your competitors and you know what they're using, then you can decide whether do I want to match them, or do I want to find something else that gives me and maybe an advantage. Or your competitor may already have like the best thing out there for your industry. And they give an example of like automobile insurers and veterinarians. Those two different fields are very unique, and they would have very specialized software out there. All right, and now back to benchmarks. A benchmark is like a unit of measure that says, hey, at this point in time, here's where our performance was. And you can benchmark anything performance related. You can benchmark the memory or processor or speed of your PC. You can benchmark the number of tickets closed in a week, that kind of stuff. Years ago when I was in the field, the very first thing I would do anytime I took over a network or had to do something at a network is I would benchmark the network. I would do a whole bunch of pings from my location, wherever my desk was, out to all the servers and all the different network infrastructure. And I would record those pings because it tells you how long the ping took to get from your point of view to those devices. Then I would work on the network, prove things, and then I would do it again, and then if my ping went from 4 milliseconds to 2 milliseconds, then I could say, hey, I've improved network performance by 50%. So you always want to start with a benchmark. Where are we at now? Anytime you want to go from one place to another, like if you want to go take your business from where it is now, and you want to get it to a better place later on. The better place later on, obviously you're making more money, things like that. But you got to know where you're at. Anytime like you go to MapQuest or something like that, they always ask you for two pieces of information. Where do you want to go and where you're starting from? So your benchmark is to give you an idea of where you're starting at. A lot of times as you're doing the benchmark, you'll actually find a problem that you didn't even know you had that might be causing your problem. The problem that you thought you had might be a symptom of another problem, and then the benchmark actually exposes that. I've seen people that have PCs that thought, oh, it's got to be filled with viruses or something because it's running so slow. And when I benchmarked the different hardware, I found out one of their memory sticks had died, so they only had 2 gigs of RAM instead of 4. But they thought they had a virus, and had I just listened to them and try to do different antivirus stuff, I would have never increased performance. So different things we can benchmark, hardware, speed, storage capacity. With software, could be user productivity. And there's a lot of different software out there. For PC performance, Passmark is the big one. There's business application performance stuff and that kind of thing, but it all depends on what you're benchmarking. Most of the time, you can do benchmarking without buying expensive software. All right, and then steps in a benchmark: define the criteria. We're going to try to figure out the printer speed. And then define a unit of measure, 100 printed pages. How long does it take me to print 100 pages? And then eliminate any extra variables. Make sure you're using the same computer, the same network, the same paper type, all that stuff. If you're measuring one printer that has a bunch of cheap paper that's very dusty and it's hard to grab the paper, and then another printer has really nice paper that's doesn't have a lot of dust inside the package, it might print faster, and it could just be based on the paper. Run tests with competing printers and then evaluate the results. All right, the weighted point method is just giving each of the individual tasks a weight. Like exams are 40% of your grade; they weigh 40%. And quizzes are 30% of your grade, or they have a weight of 30. So if you're doing that, decide on the criteria. What's going to be more important than the other. For a printer, it depends on what you want it to do. Do you want it to not use ink as fast? Do you want it to not use as much electricity? Do you want it to be able to suck in cheap paper? So think about all the different criteria and then kind of rate that, and then obviously weight the ones that are more important to you, with a higher weight. So here's just some examples. With hardware, we look at speed, storage, end users, ease of learning, ease of use, mandatory features. With support availability, do they have training? Do they have documentation? And then cost. What's the total cost of ownership? If I own this for a year, what's my total cost going to be? And then here's that weighted point. Maybe the hardware configuration, I give it a weight of 25. The software bundled with it, I give it a weight of 35. And then as I'm evaluating things, obviously the weight kind of kicks in. So obviously here I'm looking more for the software bundled with it. Here's just another example with the scores put in. And then here's how they would average out. So if I go back and look and just say, hey, this printer only beat this guy in one category, and then after that he was way behind and way behind, so this one's going to get blown out of the water. But once I actually do it based on the weights, it's just 70 to 78. That's not really blown out of the water. That's still relatively close. So weighted point thing, can be used with more than one product, and typically you get a spreadsheet. But the important part for that is to make sure that you're picking the right criteria, and you're assigning the right weight to the right criteria. All right, then your RFP, members request for proposal. It's just something that you give to all the vendors to make sure the bidding process is fair, and that you're getting exactly what you want. If you put out there, hey, I need a phone system that supports 1,000 users, and then they quote one that's only 500 users, you can actually go back legally and say, hey, the RFP said 1,000 users. You sent me your quote that said this would meet the RFP, and you only gave me 500 users. So they now would have to upgrade you, with the extra 500 for free. But it all depends on how you create the RFP and how you use it. If the RFP says you have to match these requirements, and if you can't match them, you have to list whatever you can't match in your bid, then you're kind of covered. But if you don't say that anywhere, you say, hey, we'd like a server that supports 200 users and stuff like that. Just give me your best quote, and they quote you one with 100 users. You weren't specific enough, and there's no way to back that up in court. All right, steps in the RFP process. You search for the user's need, you developed a purchase specification, you develop blah, 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 but you get the idea. All right, then here's where things get funny. The acknowledged subjective criteria. Basically, non-objective factors not directly related to the fit between product features and users' needs. And here, these are based on personal relationships, convenience, preferences, things like that. As IT people, we tend to stay with the products that we know because we know how to use them and we want to avoid extra training. As IT people, it's much more convenient for us to call our friend at CDW who does all the work for us, as opposed to do the work ourselves and then try to quote 3 different vendors to get a price. And this is something CDW does very well, and this is why they're still hanging around there and they're still doing very well. CDW has people in each category. Like they have a server guy, they have an IBM server guy, they have a Dell server guy, they have a Cisco router guy, they have a Cisco switch guy. And anytime you have a problem and you call your rep, and your rep typically will call you, every week just to say, hey, what's going on? Everything good? Do you need anything? Blah, blah. So you get that personal relationship with your rep, and then anytime you have a question, CDW will answer it for you. As long as you're obviously using them occasionally. So, like, whenever I would need a server, I'm like, hey, dude, can I talk to the server dude because I need to get a quote? And then I would talk to his HP guy and say, hey, I need to support 200 people, and it's going to be doing this, this, and this. What do you recommend? Oh, well, in that case, I'd recommend this model or this model. I'll send you the specs. And then he would send me the specs, and I would be like, all right, I'm going to go with this one. So then I'd have them quote that one. So because I was able to ask them questions and things like that, it was so convenient for me to use them that if I had to use anybody else, I would have to, go do that research myself. Go to HP's website, figure out, how many users based on processor speed, and then everything else. Of course, what I did end up doing was use CDW to give me the device that I wanted, and then I would send that quote out to the other guys as well. So you can do it that way too. So it all depends. As long as you can justify it, as long as you're still doing the best for the company. Where you run into problems is when you're doing stuff that benefits yourself. If you're quoting your own company, if you're quoting your friend's company who gives you kickbacks, if you're quoting CDW because they send you free video games, And when you get in the corporate world and you start ordering, $10, $20, $30,000 worth of stuff every month, you know obviously those vendors want your business, and they'll start throwing in stuff. Dude, you play any video games? Have you checked out Destiny, the new DLC? Hey, how about I ship in 2 copies of that on your next order? Stuff like that, and you're like, But again, most companies have policies. You have to quote 3 vendors, and that way, we can see 3 vendors quoting the exact same thing, so we know that you're always picking the one with the lowest price. And that helps you, keeps you safe, keeps the company safe, and keeps everybody on the same level playing field. Because it's not fair that the guy, let's say the guy at PC Mall, who has a lower price, isn't being used because you value the CDW guy more because he's a buddy. So again, as long as it helps them, sometimes you have a partnership agreement with vendors. When you're in the medical field, anybody that's doing stuff with you, inside your organization or inside your IT infrastructure, may have access to patient information. So you typically get them to sign a big partnership agreement. So in that case, then you can only do business with people that you have a partnership agreement with. Some companies shop their vendors every year. And then once they pick their vendor, that's their vendor. Their vendor signs a partnership agreement, and then that's their vendor for the whole year for anything you need in that area. So standardization really helps. Imagine if you went to a company that had 200 users, and anytime you needed a new PC for a user, you just went out and bought a new PC. Without standardizing. So, after 2 or 3 years, you've got 14 different PCs rolling around your area. So when somebody needs memory, then you have to figure out what PC that they have in order to fit the memory, which kind of sucks. So most companies typically specialize, or they standardize on a model. Like one company I was at, we had all HP Evos, and all the PCs were Evos. And then every 6 months the Evos would change, but the stuff would still fit kind of relatively good. So we just had to keep track of which model Evo you had, and that way we only had to go to one vendor whenever we needed something. So we got pretty good with using that one vendor site. And then especially in larger organizations like IBM, or I'm sorry, not IBM, but like Timken or General Motors, things like that. Because that way, if a PC breaks, you can take out the good parts to it, and you can use that in other PCs. But if a PC breaks and it's not a very popular model, and there's 14 other models out there, then you have to store more stuff. So you have more waste because you can't store everything, and you just decide to start chucking stuff. All right, and then benefits of support standards at Honolulu Community College, which is where I need to transfer to. Simplify the hardware acquisition and upgrade process. Now we know exactly which PC we're going to use. We're all set. Provide an HCC customized, blah, blah, blah. You guys can read that stuff. So their criteria, industry-wide acceptance, so it has to be a standard. Does it have the number of customers who require the software? The number of departments represented by customers requiring the software. So based on all their needs, they standardized in the summer of 2010 on the Dell Optiplex 780 Mini Tower. And then those were the specs. Dell sells more PCs to educational facilities than anybody else. And almost every school that you go to has Dells in them. Because Dell does very good with marketing and pricing for educational places, and that way, like if you go in high school and you always have a Dell, then you go to college and you always have a Dell, you're comfortable with Dell, so that when you graduate, you may want to buy a Dell. All right, and then their laptop standardization, what they picked. Some companies have a product standards committee, or a committee that kind of does these different things. And this is a group just defines, hey, here's what the standard PC should be. Here's what the standard processor speed should be. Here's what the standard amount of RAM should be. And you typically got support specialists, then you've got a couple end users, some managers, that kind of stuff. And then changes, and we've already talked about this. If it's not broke, why fix it? If it's working as good as you need it, and the new version is not going to give you any noticeable benefit, why upgrade? We did something one time. We had girls, and they were coding. So they were like, a doctor would turn in his notes on a visit, and then these girls would code it, and then make sure and then process that code to the insurance company. So they were always whining, oh, our PCs are so slow, we need new PCs, blah, blah, blah. And there was like 10 of them down there in this room. So what we did was we bought one new PC and we popped it in and had a girl use it, and we said, hey, more's coming as soon as the budget frees up. And then we watched her, watched her performance, and her performance didn't change. She was still averaging, X amount of claims per week, and even with the new PC, she was still amounting to X claims, per week. So the new PC didn't improve her performance at all. So after they left, or even in the evening hour, we went and popped and took it back and popped her old PC back in there, and then we just told them that over the weekend it started smoking, and then the janitor called us and we fixed it, and we had to go pull it out. And then later on, when they're asking when we're getting new PCs, well, it wasn't approved for the budget. Because the last thing you want to tell them is, hey, we did this and you weren't productive with it, so we pulled it out. Because then they're like, oh, well, if we get it again, we'll work harder in order to get those, and then once we get those, we'll go back to our slacking ways, and it won't improve anything. Just make sure that, again, anytime you're looking to buy new PCs or buy new software, you have to discuss things with the user. What are you trying to fix? What do you think that this was going to do for you? Sometimes just talking to them, you can kind of say, well, a PC is not going to fix that problem. You're still going to be slow. Especially when they say, oh, well, when I submit the claims to the provider, a new PC would speed that up. Well, no, it wouldn't, because my internet's still my internet, and it's only going to be able to process so many bits per second anyway, and it doesn't matter about how fast the computer is. So the worst thing you can do is just, the manager says, hey, we got some slow PCs, we need to get some new ones, and then you go and pop them in there, and then the users aren't happy because the new PCs don't meet their needs because you never talk to anybody, that kind of stuff. All right, so how we implement the standards. Again, it all depends. What's your budget like? How much money do you have to do these different things? How much are you wasting on training and support costs and repair costs? And then if I implement new standards, am I going to lose some employees? When some companies changed from plain old telephone services to voice over IP, the phone guy, the older phone guy, didn't want to learn, everything all over again. So he was let go, or he just quit and went to another company that had an old phone system. Because a traditional phone system and a voice over IP system are totally different. One is some legacy nasty crap, and one is, fits all the new networking standards. All right, for updating products, this stuff is kind of self-explanatory. You still have to focus on the big thing. What problem does it solve? How much is this going to increase productivity? And I hate to keep harping on Office or Microsoft products, but if you look at Office 2003, it does everything your average user needs. There was no reason to upgrade to Office 2006 or 2008 or 2010 or 2012 or Office 365. All those extra benefits were just crazy stuff, very specific to specific industries, and there was no huge benefit to the average user. So why pay $500 every couple years for each user in your company to upgrade to those products? Where, on the other hand, if I have coding software, and the girls that are doing the codes, as they're putting stuff in there, if something triggers and they get like an alert that says, hey, this could be coded at a higher mark and produce more money, then that software obviously could generate more revenue. So again, it all depends on what you're doing. All right, and then adopting or modifying, again, you've got to analyze things. You've got to make sure you come up with concrete evidence. It can't be, oh, well, this is better because it's blue, or all the users like this software better. Well, that doesn't help the company. That doesn't increase productivity. Just because a user likes it doesn't do anything for them. When you're making these decisions, you need to pretend it's your money and it's your company, and would you still buy it if it was? All right, then reasons to convert or not convert. It has new features that we need. It's the latest innovation, blah. I don't know about that. But sometimes vendors discontinue support for older products like Windows XP. Will still do the job that most places actually need, but because Microsoft discontinues support for it, any new security holes in the software could then be exploited because Microsoft's not patching them anymore. And then reasons not to convert, the new features aren't worth the cost. Microsoft Office. We already have a substantial investment in existing technology. If I already have VMware, or let's say I have VirtualBox or Microsoft Virtual PC, and it's doing what I need it to do, upgrading to VMware and spending, $1 bajillion isn't going to solve any problem. or the new technology is not stable yet. And typically, like when new stuff comes out, like Windows 10 just came out this summer, and everybody is in the class, they're talking, oh, I upgrade to Windows 10, it's such a pain in the butt, it doesn't do this, doesn't do that. Well, why did you upgrade right away? I mean, I almost always wait for the first service pack to come out before I upgrade to new software. All right, and then changes to product standards during the 2010s. Now we have USB 3, which is like 10 times faster than USB 2. We have the 802.11, and that should be a .11n, not .1n. Wireless standard that has powered antennas inside there that presses a signal farther and goes at much more higher speeds. We also have AG that's out now too. We have voice recognition input. We have Windows 7 versus Windows 8. A lot of people liked 7 but hated 8. So think about how sad the guys were, the IT guys were, at companies that upgraded to Windows 8 and then all the users hate it. And Microsoft Office 2007 versus 2010 versus Office 2003. For the average user, you can go get Office 2000 and it'll still do everything that user needs. And there's a free compatibility pack that you can download from Microsoft's website that allow it to open up all the different files all the way up through whatever the current thing is. Now we have cloud computing where we're moving things to the cloud. Sometimes maybe that's the reason for change. Hey, it's the cost of this server room and the heating and cooling and the storage space needed and all this stuff, is getting kind of high. And we have all these extra servers because we keep buying new ones. Maybe we need to move to the cloud. Maybe we need to focus on that standard. And then if you're in marketing, it used to be marketing was just, creating your promotional material and doing the website. But now, we've got corporate Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts and all the other stuff. All right, and then finally, the acceptable use guidelines. These are policies that we tell and say, hey, these are what you are and what you're not permitted to do. Like we used to have an orientation where I, as the director of IT, I would come out and talk to new hires and say, hey, if you go to Best Buy and you buy, a music CD, you're allowed to bring that in and play it on your PC. But if you burn one at home, you're not allowed to bring that in, and if you do, you need to bring it to IT and let us scan it for viruses. Because if your PC is full of viruses and you burn a music CD, you're going to put those viruses right on the CD and come right in, and you go right past our border software, and then you're going to pop it on your PC, and your PC is going to get infected. You have to make sure that users understand what information is confidential. At a school, we're not allowed to share student information. So as long as you're 18, if your parents call me and say, hey, what did little Billy get on his test, or how did he score in class, I'm not allowed to tell them unless you give me permission, because you're an adult and your information is protected. If I'm in healthcare, patient records are protected. If I'm in some kind of financial company, we have Sarbanes-Oxley that protects financial information. So different organizations have different legal standards that they have to follow with unauthorized access of confidential information. All right, and then the chapter summary, blah, 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 hooray! All right, so that wraps up this week. Remember, if you guys have any questions, make sure you drop me an email. And other than that, have a great week.